You're listening to Idea Collider, a show that explores the world of asymmetric learning. On this show, I will sit down with pharmaceutical experts and business leaders to discuss how to embrace uncertainty and the different learning style that follows. I'm your host, Mike Rea. Let's get into the show.
So, welcome to another episode of Idea Collider. I'm delighted to have someone who I've always enjoyed watching on Twitter, X, and who I've enjoyed meeting in person quite a few times now. Paul Peter Tak, CEO of Candel. Paul Peter, you had a kind of remarkable journey as a clinician in Amsterdam to leading really what are cutting-edge biotech companies. What would be a kind of pivotal moment or idea in your early career that ignited your passion for bridging clinical practice into scientific innovation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, thank you for having me in your podcast, Mike. It's really great to be here. I always had a very broad interest, but at some point I came to the conclusion that in a very simple way, almost experiencing this as a patient myself at a young age, that there's really no consensus sometimes in medicine. I think some of the most basic assumptions are unproven. And I changed my ideas of going into economics, actually, into studying medicine and trying to do a better job and become a really good physician. That was my goal always, to become a compassionate physician as well. Yep. And then I've been very focused on clinical work for a long time. And then I thought, how can we be more systematic in really driving innovation, developing better treatments, therapeutic strategies for patients? And I got more and more involved in research and had a long academic career as a physician scientist.
Yeah, I saw, I did a quick Grok search and it told me just how many papers and citations you've had. That's quite a remarkable statistic.
Yeah, maybe I've overdone it a little bit, but it's true. I've been cited about 100,000 times. Yeah, and published more than 600 peer-reviewed papers.
Yeah, which then sort of makes your entry to the industry pretty. Was that with determination or with a direction in mind?
I've always been quite bad at predicting my own future in terms of career. And I've said for a long time that I would never work for the pharmaceutical industry, based on prejudice, I guess. But I did work together with Biotech and Pharma. So in my last 2 years of being a professor of medicine and head of the Department of Clinical Immunology and Rheumatology at the Amsterdam University Medical Center, I think in these 2 years, I was a consultant to about 30 companies, all big pharma companies actually, and many biotech companies. So at some point I thought, maybe I've given enough advice. I want to do this myself.
Definitely. And you made a sort of pretty significant career at GSK and the chief immunology officer. And, how could you describe the sort of entry into a large pharma company from an academic career? How did that feel?
Yeah, well, first I'll share the fear that I experienced when I made the decision. So I signed up for GSK and decided to step down from all my roles in academia. I was very active internationally also on basically all the editorial boards in my field and in the European League Against Rheumatism, on the executive team and on the American College of Rheumatology. So there was a big EULAR meeting in 2011 and I was a co-organizer. And then we always had a nice event where we would celebrate the success of the meeting, massive meeting, right? And so we would drink champagne and then I stood up and gave a little speech and I said, I want to announce that I'm going to step down from all my roles after this very successful meeting. I gave 11 lectures at that EULAR and I stepped down from all my roles in academia. So people thought that must be an incredible midlife crisis here. And I was also a little bit nervous about leaving everything that was so familiar. And I spent so much time to get to that point, actually. But I felt I needed to move on and try to have a bigger impact, which I thought I could do by potentially creating medicines for maybe millions of patients. That was the idea. So then there was a long summer. I had this transition going to big pharma. I joined GSK initially to become the global head of immunoinflammation, everything in autoimmunity from idea to discovery to development to approval and beyond. And then later I also started to lead other therapy areas, including oncology. And I remember that it took me less than 1 week. I even remember where I was actually when I had this feeling that this was absolutely the right decision. And, Mike, actually, I found the transition from academia to big pharma quite simple. Mm-hmm. The reason is that I discovered that I use the same principles to build successful organizations in academia as I do in big pharma, as I do in biotech. I led a very large academic department. We had like 140 FTEs when I left, and we had our own biotech company. And I think I led it in a way like a little company, right? Using the same leadership and management and business principles to drive performance, to drive innovation. So I really enjoyed it. And I also really enjoyed the scale of the impact that you can have in a large pharmaceutical company. So unlike some biotech entrepreneurs, I was very positive about this experience and learned a lot.
Definitely. I've been interested in digging into those principles that you carried over into your career.
There are several, right? And I described them on a lazy Sunday afternoon years ago and summarized them on a little article that I wrote on LinkedIn. So if you go to my name, Paul Peter Tak, on LinkedIn, and you go to post and activity and then to articles, you'll find a little article with the title something like How to Build a Biotech Organization or Any Innovative Organization. And I created it like a little Greek temple with a foundation and a roof and 10 pillars. I mean, it could have been 12 pillars or 14, but this gives the idea, right? And the foundation is really about building trust. I think this is critical for any successful organization. So you need to be really thoughtful about how you can build trust, and we can elaborate on that. But obviously, it means that you do what you say that you do. It means strong focus on transparency, integrity, etc. I think the roof is probably collective intelligence. How can you leverage collective intelligence? And there's research about this that they'll think about in Europe, football teams, or in America, soccer teams, or any super sports team, right? There may be teams where you may not even have real superstars, maybe one or two, that are doing much better than other teams and that will be much more successful and may become world champions. And this is really about leveraging collective intelligence. So these same principles need to be implemented in any organization that aims to be really successful. And then there are the 10 pillars. I think 3 of the 10 pillars are described as being related to optimizing decision making. A lot is about making the best decisions and sticking with the decision until there's a reason to move on and then pivot swiftly. So this is a high-level summary. I think if people want to read more, then they will find my little Greek temple on the internet, including the references that for each pillar I have references in the literature.
Nice. So it's interesting because I think that you found it good when you got there, but did you see large pharma as improvable at that point?
Yes, I think it depends, but it is possible to lead a pharmaceutical company in a successful way. I think it starts at the top. And you need to make sure that you get in a really influential position to really drive change because it's a very complex matrix. So I was lucky enough to be almost parachuted at the top of immunoinflammation initially, which gave me a lot of influence in the hierarchy of big pharma. But I also discovered it's not sufficient. You also need to make sure that you have a voice in the complex matrix of governance. So I got involved basically in all the governance boards. I became the chair of the scientific review board, which was the most senior board, overseeing all the scientific decisions that we made across the company, with actually my boss sitting on the SRB. So he allowed me actually to step up as a chair. And then, of course, you listen to each other, right? This is not about being the dominating voice, but it is about getting to the right decision and then make sure that actually it happens. Then there were the boards at the interface of science and commercial, which was then called the Portfolio and Investment Board. So I was the voice of R&D in the Portfolio Investment Board and other boards. So together that helped me to really drive change. And in a relatively short period of time, we got many new potential medicines into the clinic, actually 5 of which have been approved since then. So the success rate was actually, looking back, very high. So I think if you start at the top, really drive innovation, scientific culture, rigorous decision making, you can be influential. But here is the problem that I've seen. It's very difficult, I think, to find leaders who understand the different mindsets that you need for early discovery, where you need to embrace a certain form of organized chaos almost, to have creativity, etc. And at the same time, who understand what you need in late stage development, which is highly regulated where you cannot drop the ball in any way, where there's less room for creativity. The same is true for the whole regulatory pathways, for commercial pathways. Well, still a lot of space for innovation, of course, and creativity, but it's different from what you do in early discovery. So understanding these different cultures, I think it's very difficult to find leaders who are able to embrace both different ways of working that you need in different parts of the organization. And I think that's why Big Pharma in general has been relatively unsuccessful in light of the huge investments that are made.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially because you pulled out decision science or decision discipline as a thing, because I think that our experience is that cultural difference between discovery, early R&D, and late stage R&D. It's often this kind of cookie cutter approach or a kind of process approach versus a embracing of the known unknowns in the early stage. People put all kinds of degrees of accuracy around their forecasts and around their probabilities of success that they know don't make any sense. And then those things are used to take a product forward. And that kind of embrace of uncertainty is rare in large companies.
This is absolutely true. And we created at the time very new and innovative models to also work with the external world, right? Because I always said we have very many scientists, amazing scientists working in our organization. But even if you have the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, the real fact is that most scientists do not work for you. And so you need to get access to their brains, and they may have a different remit and different ways of thinking. So how can you actually work in the most optimal way with the external world? And there are different models, right? And experimented with many models that were quite successful. But I'm most proud of the immunology network that I created. And it's sort of boring term because I didn't have a better term. But it was a highly innovative way of bringing the external world into GSK without actually making them GSK employees. Yeah. And I did that by, maybe I can briefly describe the different pillars that will bring it to life. The first pillar was the creation of an external immunology board. So my bias is that we live in the era of immunology, and most discovery will be touched by the field of immunology at this time. This is true for a period of decades, I believe, ranging from oncology to immunoinflammation to vaccines to, well, etc. Right? Neuroinflammation will be big. So the common language spoken by the external immunology board members, who were the superstars in academia, full professors, was immunology. But they all had also slightly different perspective. This is the cognitive diversity. So there was like key expert in autoimmunity, key expert in immuno-oncology, key expert in vaccines, etc., etc. Also, they were selected because they did not have an ego that was hindering them, right? Which sometimes happens in scientific advisory boards. Everybody wants to be the smartest. We tried to really create collective intelligence there and did so very successfully. The second pillar was the immunology catalyst. These were also stars from academia who, in a very competitive process, were selected to join us actually for an extended sabbatical in our facilities. One of the major R&D hubs of GSK is in Stevenage in the UK. So it's like a huge campus. And if selected, we gave these people a lab. We gave them personnel like postdocs, PhD students, technicians. And most importantly, we gave them freedom to work on what they believed was the next big thing in immunology, which helped me actually to discover what the next big thing in immunology would be, because everybody will always have blind spots. So an example would be Luke O'Neill, who's a world-famous immunologist from Dublin and also an amazing human being. So he was a member of the external immunology board, and he liked the concept so much that he said, I actually want to go into the immunology catalyst. And he joined us for a year. He actually brought 2 of his postdocs as well and created basically the Luke O'Neill team in Stevenage, not being an employee of GSK, total freedom. If he would discover something in his field, not using our chemistry, he would even own the IP. So this was a radical moment. So I had a little bit of a discussion with the lawyers about that, but I could make the executive decision. Ultimately, it helped me to discover or to see the field of immunometabolics as a whole new field in immunology. And ultimately, it led to the creation of a new biotech company, which is now very successful, based in Oxford, called Citrix. They just got an award last week. So there were different outcomes. We could discover new science that could lead to a new internal discovery unit. If we thought, well, it's still a little bit early days, it could lead to the formation of a new biotech company where we would bring in venture capital, including the rigor of decision-making of external financing, and then would sit on the board. I'm still now an independent director of Citrix and a co-founder. And then you would be the first to hear that there's an amazing breakthrough, and you could actually, in a competitive process, compete with other pharma companies to bring it in. And the interesting thing is that actually Eli Lilly is now the key partner rather than GSK. So we kept that very open. So this is, I think, a very interesting way of working in a whole new world. And I thought maybe at some point they can replace the whole system of discovery performance units, as we called them at the time, by a whole new ecosystem of biotech companies. Well, then before I had created that ecosystem, I moved on and actually went full-time into biotech myself.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because I think that kind of body of serendipitous discovery I think it's often lost in the kind of very directed world in large pharma where things are pulled through instead of allowed to find their own paths.
I totally agree. So I think if pharma wants to be really successful in discovery, well, they also need to have this culture of process and regulatory aspects, etc. Probably they need more like a loose ecosystem, as I just described, or as happens more and more actually, because it may be difficult to have the vision to really deliver on this, maybe work very closely with biotech companies. But then the question is, how do you spot actually the next big thing in biotech? And that's, again, where I think many companies fail. And just imagine how many combinations of immune checkpoint inhibitors have we seen? How many programs do we see now with a PD-1 or a PD-L1 combined with a VEGF? So it's one big echo chamber. So there is something like, there's a bigger problem, right? People understand the concept of the military industrial complex. There's something like that between the biotech investor pharma complex at this time, that people all look at each other and ask the question, have we seen any example of success before? And then they all go like the big herd in the same direction. 5-10 years ago, hardly anyone was interested in obesity. Now we have breakthroughs, right? At Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. And now you see all the other programs, many of them sort of Me Too programs. And this is hindering true innovation. I think it's a waste of resources.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we said on this podcast before, the GLP-1s were not novel when they were brought through. This was a sort of change in the TPP, towards something that would be commercially attractive that really allowed them to go somewhere. But they were known about for a long time. Scientifically, they were well understood.
Yes, absolutely right. Actually, we had one which was called elbiclotide at GSK, right? It was approved for diabetes. It was deprioritized. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
so it's interesting. If you think about it's all related to the same principles. How do you make sure that you can see the next big thing? And I'm a professor of immunology, and my assumption has always been there must be many things that I do not see.
Yeah.
So therefore, how do you get access to the brightest people? I described the external immunology board as a pillar of the immunology network at GSK, but I've always done the same. In academia, I was very much involved in this international community because I did not just give my share of my ideas. I actually got a lot of energy and ideas from the conversations with really smart people. And that Candel Therapeutics, the company that I lead currently, for that reason, we created the Research Advisory Board, the RAB, with people like Jim Ellison, the Nobel Prize laureate, and other key leaders in the field.
Very nice. Actually, well, let's get on to Candel because we've talked for half an hour and we haven't got onto the company. But, Candel, you're advancing viral immunotherapies for cancers like prostate cancer, glioma. I would describe it as a game changer. How would you kind of describe, first of all, joining Candel? What was your motivation, and then what makes you excited about what it has?
Yeah, I was during the pandemic looking for a new opportunity where I wanted to bring together everything that I had learned in academia, both in practicing medicine and in research, and also what I learned about drug discovery and development and leadership in big pharma. I wanted to use that in an entrepreneurial way. So I looked at different opportunities. And then I was contacted by a search company about a company called Advantagene doing business as Candel. That's how it was called at the time. And I looked at the two molecules, and to my big surprise, I'd never heard of these programs. Although the head of oncology at GSK reported to me, so I called him as well. Did I miss something? But he has also never heard of it. So it was completely under the radar.
Yeah.
I looked at it, I did my due diligence. I think I'm probably able to say, based on what I've done in my career, that I'm able to see through innovation, often before other people see it. I'm not too hindered by the filters that people apply. Well, we've never seen anything work like this. I looked at this and I thought, these are two potential transformative medicines that are already in the clinic. I did my due diligence. I spoke to key academic experts in the field, which reassured me that there were two potential real medicines here. At the same time, I thought we need to fill in the scientific gaps. When I joined the company 2020, September 2020, it's now more than 4.5 years ago, I started to present to investors. And sometimes I felt almost embarrassed because these people knew me very well, that there were many gaps in our scientific understanding about the mechanism of action. But I thought it's like aspirin in the old days when people knew that it worked against headache, but they had no idea whatsoever how it worked. Ultimately, the thing that really matters is, does it work? And we are able to fill in the gaps. We have now published in journals like Nature. We have many papers that we are submitting or that are submitted at this time at the top journals. And we have filled in these gaps. But what I saw is two potential medicines that could transform the life of patients with very significant unmet need, very difficult to treat indications. And at the same time, the need to really drive change in this company to get this right. And I thought with my mixed background, maybe this is where I can be helpful. And if I lead this company, which is very small, to success, then maybe at the end of my career, I will have had a bigger impact than when I become the CSO of a very large other company. And I was actually in the process of becoming the CSO of a company bigger than GSK, and I had passed the CEO already. But I thought maybe this is not going to be easy. But if I turn this around, this is where I can make really a difference. And that's, I think we are now well underway to do that.
It's, my own personal experience. We've had a couple of projects recently where, the heads of R&D at a couple of, very large companies want to do something, and then they talk to their people, and their people don't really want to do something different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen. So, even if you are the head of R&D at a major company, you can't make things happen, which always feels like a bit of a backward step to me. If, like you said, if you have vision, if you can see something, but you still can't make it happen in a large company, then, something's not working properly. But I'd be interested in that, because you described this, does it work? If it works, what will happen? The ability to kind of go from end to end with that is pretty important, right? So, if this works, all of a sudden the runway is pretty clear.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I feel quite confident saying that our lead asset works. Why? Because we just delivered, just in the last 6-7 months, we delivered on a pivotal phase 3 randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial in early localized prostate cancer. Very big trial, took more than 10 years to complete it. Why? Because it's early localized disease. So you need sufficient follow-up to show that we've achieved what we wanted to achieve, which is not that patients live longer with cancer or that they have longer metastases-free survival.
Yeah.
Our hurdle is higher. We want patients to live without cancer in prostate cancer. That's the real opportunity. There are many medicines that may prolong life. Think of hormonal therapy, ADT, androgen deprivation therapy. Medical oncologists may think that these patients are fine because they live longer and they may be stable, which is of course not the case for everybody. It's still a major cause of mortality due to cancer. However, if you ask the patients, most of them hate chemical castration. That's what we are talking about, right? This has a very negative impact on quality of life in 2/3 of the patients. So we want to avoid the need to use these medicines. We have curative intent, but it takes a long time to get there. We've achieved that. So we've shown 30% improvement with a relatively simple intervention in terms of disease-free survival, as we agreed with the FDA, and then supported by all the secondary endpoints. So we are very excited about this. But we also, in the last 6-7 months, delivered on a small randomized clinical trial in another very difficult to treat form of cancer, which is borderline resectable pancreatic cancer. So here we are not aiming for cure. Well, we would love to cure these patients, but nobody can at this time. But here we are aiming for extended survival with a good quality of life.
Yeah.
And we see a complete separation of the overall survival curves. This is the gold standard endpoint in pancreatic cancer and also in several other solid tumors. Supported by beautiful biomarker research, we can fundamentally change the tumor microenvironment in these patients. And we have a patient who lives now with metastatic pancreatic cancer for more than 5 years. And this is ongoing. Everybody who's ever treated such a patient knows that never happens. We have another patient who actually underwent after treatment surgery, which is the only hope for cure. So think of a Whipple procedure, major surgery. But then after the surgery, it was found that the margins of the resection were positive for tumor. So the patient had still pancreatic cancer. This patient is also still alive after more than 3 years, ongoing. So we are introducing a whole new concept in therapy-resistant cancer, where we change progressive cancer into a chronic disease with acceptable quality of life. We've shown exactly the same in completely therapy-resistant metastatic non-small cell lung cancer, patients who had failed chemotherapy and immune checkpoint inhibitors, like Keytruda. And these patients run out of options. They get, in the context of standard of care, docetaxel chemotherapy, which has a lot of toxicity and side effects. And despite that, these patients have an expected median overall survival of less than a year. We've shown in an open label clinical trial in these completely therapy-resistant patients that we could double the expected median overall survival. Nobody has shown data that come even close to it.
Yeah.
And some people say, yeah, but this is not a randomized controlled trial. This is true. This is a phase 2A clinical trial. Most phase 2A clinical trials fail, actually. And you don't see this dramatic improvement. And you stop the program and you move on and try something else.
Yeah.
Here, we are focused on an indication where there are no placebo effects. There is no regression to the mean. There is no expectation bias. These patients are not going to get better, even with the best available chemotherapy. So we know we have a potential medicine here. And that provides the rationale for a large randomized phase 3 clinical trial. That's exactly what we are deciding right now.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing, I'm going to go back to, Candel, small biotech. You face the challenges of the biotech marketplace at the moment.
Yeah.
How much of your job is about, describing the potential about where this might go, but also equally the kind of challenges of where you're at the moment? So what are the challenges of, running a randomized phase 3 study for all of the indications? Like Keytruda-like application is not cheap.
No, it's not cheap. And we may work in different ways during different phases of the life of our company. So when I joined the company, we fundamentally changed the company, including the whole leadership team. We brought in top talent. So my first remit is to bring in the best people and make sure that they work together in the right way and create new high-performing team behaviors, the right culture, etc. Then next was to really prioritize, looking through different lenses at the same time, including what's the reason to believe that this is going to work? What is the scientific rationale? What is the regulatory path forward? What's the developability of the medicine? What's the commercial opportunity? What could the medicine ultimately look like? So we made some very difficult decisions. So our lead asset is called CAN-2409. It's a viral immunotherapy. It leads to in situ immunization against the patient's own tumor. So you don't need to inject all the tumors like you have to do often with T-VEC or Imlygic, which is an approved oncolytic virus. So again, this is not an oncolytic virus. You choose 1 or 2 tumors to basically educate the patient's own immune cells how to recognize and kill the tumor cells throughout the body. So actually it's very patient-friendly. The procedure is very simple and straightforward. So you need to think through all these aspects, right? From a clinical perspective, is it aligned with normal clinical practice? Do you need any special procedures that are not acceptable in light of the benefit? So for our investigational medicines, we thought all of this through. And one of the programs that we deprioritized was the program for CAN-2409 in glioblastoma, brain cancer. Not because it did not work. Actually, we just published very encouraging data in neuro-oncology for CAN2409. This is a high impact journal, very encouraging results. We can show that we fundamentally change the tumor response, or the immune response against the tumor, etc. We were ready to start a phase 3 clinical trial, to your point about phase 3 trials, in glioblastoma, first-line treatment combined with standard gross total resection. So the surgeon will try to remove as much tumor as possible. We know that there are always tumor cells that stay behind in the tumor bed, in the resection bed, and then you infiltrate it with CAN2409. But then I realized that it would take years actually to get to the answer. And definitely in the current environment, the biotech company is just not able to do that. And at the same time, there are other indications where you will get to the answers much faster. And therefore, where you will create value. This is about the value creating journey in biotech at a much faster pace. For example, in therapy resistant non-small cell lung cancer, where we are really at the other end of treatment compared to what I described for prostate cancer. And based on just 46 patients who were treated per protocol, we could get to this amazing answer. And we are now working with the academic key experts who are very excited by these results, and the regulators, the FDA, to get to a phase 3 protocol signed off by everybody. I think that will create value in itself. That's where biotech is different from pharma. This is not only about the commercial opportunity, it's about the value creation journey. This is a protocol that we can show to potential strategic partners or other sources of non-dilutive funding. And then if we are able to secure at least partly non-dilutive funding to fund such a big project, then we can press the button and start it. And then we would probably do that in an externalized model. So until now, and that's why I said you may have different needs and different ways of working during different stages of the company. Until now, we did everything ourselves. We were our own CRO, clinical research organization. We had like 1,000 patients last year in clinical trials, and we did not work with the CRO, which is pretty amazing. It's not because I'm against working with CROs, but actually it helped us to work in a very cost-effective way. Clearly, that's not scalable. So if we go ahead and start a phase 3 trial in lung cancer, which will be in that, say, 400-500 patients, that will be completely externalized through CRO. And we will have a clear vision about what is the medicine going to look like from a commercial perspective. And here again, we want to work in an externalized model. And that's why I'm super happy that we work with you actually, with Idea Pharma and with other external partners, rather than building a huge infrastructure in-house that can never be as good in terms of quality as these external partners at this stage of the company. This gives us also the flexibility. You don't end up with a big fixed cost, fixed headcount. So imagine that you have some delay somewhere, which we hope we will avoid. We've always delivered on all our milestones, but you need to think in terms of decision trees and risk mitigation all the time. So then you need to pay all these salaries while actually you don't have work for them. So everything at the right time is, I think, very important. So that's, and the third example would be in manufacturing. When I joined the company, the previous management had just started to build its own little factory at our site in Needham, Massachusetts. And I decided to stop that process actually and transform the lab into a discovery lab, which has also been very successful. And we partner, we hardly ever speak about it, but we partner with key leaders in academia, including Carl Jung, the father of the field of CAR T cells. Then we have an enlightened discovery platform. But then manufacturing itself of our lead asset, CAN2409, takes place at SAFC, Merck Millipore in California. Why? They are real experts. They are probably the largest manufacturer of adenoviruses in the US, one of the largest in the world. And we oversee this. I brought in the top team to oversee it. But again, in a very flexible, creative model where I can switch things on and off. We would not have survived as a company if we had not made a decision and if we had spent tens of millions of dollars before the readout of the phase 3 clinical trial in prostate cancer in December. So I wanted to wait until that time. Then we saw the data. Then your probability of success goes from, let's say, 35 or 40% to more than 90%, I think more than 92% to be precise, based on industry metrics. That's where we are right now. And then you can waste money and spend the big bucks actually on manufacturing. So that's how we think about working with external partners in commercial, in manufacturing, and also moving forward in development.
Yeah, which is kind of It goes back to that sort of metaphor about the monkey juggling on a pedestal. If you ask people to produce that, a lot of people start building the pedestal before they
Yes.
figure out whether they can teach a monkey to juggle. They go, well, you need to get your priorities right in biotech, more than maybe pharma does. That's a really interesting illustration of, prioritizing what matters today as well as what matters in the future.
Yeah, and then, it may be different if you have like a one-trick pony company and where you just need to set yourself up for success and take all the risk. For us, it's different. We have created an integrated R&D capability ranging from early discovery, which is done in a super cost-effective way because most of it is based on in silico modeling of human biology data. So if there's a smart person sitting behind a computer using AI approaches, and then give a very, very cost-effective way of getting to molecules in a relatively short period of time. So we have that. Then we have Candel 3110, our second investigational medicine, which I also believe has transformative potential. It seems to work in the most therapy-resistant disease, which is recurrent glioblastoma. We published these data in Nature. We got a huge grant, so it pays for itself. It's also beautiful external validation, a grant of 16 million, US dollars from the Breakthrough Cancer Foundation in the US to extend our phase 1b trial. So I think this academic community believes in these data and is very supportive. So we had that. And then we also had the programs for Candel 2409, as I mentioned, in pancreatic cancer, in lung cancer, where we had seen already very encouraging overall survival data. So I thought you need to avoid expectation bias. Before the readout of a big, large phase 3 trial, you want to wait until you've seen it, because otherwise we would have pivoted and we would have survived as a company focusing on the other indications and programs that I just described. The consequence is that now that we have gone up from a probability of success of, let's say, 35% to more than 92%, that people say, why are you delaying the BLA submission to Q4 next year? We are not delaying anything. This is a very fast timeline, actually, for the production, for the manufacturing of a biopharmaceutical product. This is based on very systematic decision-making. And our shareholders would not have been as happy if we had spent all their money and the phase 3 trial would have been negative, right? So we'll get there. And we use this same time to also get ready for introducing a whole new paradigm, getting ready for launch excellence, working with Idea Pharma, working with Global Life Sciences, and they've done amazing market research and payer research in the US and in Europe, and also market research recently in Japan. We work also with a third undisclosed partner doing patient advocacy and medical affairs. So we will get all these aspects that you need to really think through ready at the same time. It will ultimately, if you look at the area under the curve, I think over time, will create more value than when you rush a BLA submission and you've not really thought through that you also need to be ready for launch excellence.
Yeah. How would you describe, because clearly everyone's complaining about the funding and the kind of financing environment at the moment. Do you think it's a kind of collective anxiety about investing at the moment? Do you think that people have forgotten how to do it? Or how would you describe the culture at the moment?
Yeah, it's very difficult. There are many factors, right, that play a key role, including geopolitical factors that we do not control, right? Several big wars going on, a lot of unpredictability from a political point of view. So there are many factors that we do not control. Of course, we've also seen that the long-term consequences of the impact of COVID-19, right? We should not forget what the impact has been there ultimately for inflation and interest rates, etc. All these factors matter. Then I think there's a specific crisis in biotech, in part because during a certain time, too many biotech companies were created. Too many biotech companies did an IPO, not always based on solid science, but maybe based on very fancy ideas and slide decks, but not necessarily supported by rigorous science. So in a way, there is a specific problem in biotech as well. Then there's the problem that always plays a role is how do you shift paradigms? And I touched upon it when I said, well, it's difficult for people to see what is the next big thing. And that's why they focus on what they have seen before. So now everybody moves into the field of obesity. Well, nobody was interested in obesity until 5-10 years ago. We see the same for modalities. It's always like this, right? I've been involved in the development and testing of many new antibodies for immune-mediated inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. So at an early stage of my career, I tested most of the new antibodies in rheumatoid arthritis, and I can tell you most were negative, right? Beautifully designed experimental medicine clinical trials that showed that depleting or non-depleting anti-CD4 antibodies did not work, and IL-10 sub-Q did not work, etc. Until we tested infliximab for the first time in the world together with the Kennedy Institute. Now I'm on the board of the Kennedy Institute, so it's like the circle of life. But I've not forgotten the people who told me in those days, well, Peter, an antibody for rheumatoid arthritis will never work.
Right.
And there are pharma companies that I know that because I've seen their old files had anti-TNF antibodies that they deprioritized at the time because they did market research predicting that even if it would work, that the price would never be more than 10 or 20 times that of an NSAID, right? And all of this has been proven untrue. So this is a big problem. Then you've seen the same with cell and gene therapy, with antibody drug conjugates, with radioligands. Nobody believes in it until there's a certain momentum where people start to get FOMO and they see the multiple examples of success. And then there's another Me Too program. So that's where we are right now with the viral immunotherapies. I think we are starting to see the success. We are, I think, at the tipping point, or maybe just beyond the tipping point of this. Think of J&J Innovation making deep investments in this field. They organized a very successful panel discussion during ESCO where I spoke, CG Oncology, Replimune. We don't see any of these as competitors, but as colleagues, actually, that drive the field forward. So there's always also the specific problem, not only in biotech in more general terms, but also in how do you drive innovation? It always takes time before people see it. So we had to deal with this, and that's why we've tried to be very conscious in terms of how we spend our resources. I think now that we have positive data in a pivotal phase 3, supported by the FDA, we have a SPA, Special Protocol Assessment, agreed with the FDA for this program, even fast track designation. 2 weeks ago, we got the RMED, the Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy designation, which is like a breakthrough designation for gene therapies and other innovative approaches. So that's a fantastic support from the regulators. So now that we have all these data and this support, I think I have more in my toolbox to secure financing beyond just doing equity deals. So we'll get there. We are still hugely undervalued. It's almost hilarious when you think about it, that we have a market cap of somewhere between 250 and 300 million. Well, we have a pivotal phase 3 data, 2 phase 2 trials positive in very difficult to treat solid tumors. And then a second program, actually with positive data where everybody has failed in recurrent glioblastoma, which is also an enabling indication for other tumors outside the brain. Think of triple negative breast cancer, potentially melanoma, sarcoma, etc., based on the molecular mechanism. And then a discovery platform, which could be a company in itself.
Yeah.
So we are quite calm. We are very strongly supported by our current investors. Like the chair of my board is Paul Manning, the CEO of PBM Capital. A very smart investor with a long-term vision and very deep pockets. But we're also very strongly supported by other investors. Our biggest investor at this time is Fidelity, right? They came in December and they own about 15%, which is their maximum actually, based on their governance rules of what they can own. So we have now very strong and long-term support. But yeah, this was a little bit of a test of perseverance, persistence, and resilience, and we got there, I think.
Yeah, and those stories of biotechs that suddenly are the future of a major pharma company, I think that's almost, that goes back to that ecosystem that you described early on of lots of innovations that need time to bubble before they get brought forwards, and J&J Innovation have been a great example of that for maybe 10 since Paul Stoffel's time, bringing that stuff through. Probably as we're coming into the last 5 minutes, I want to do some more rapid fire Q&A. So think about maybe a book or an idea that's recently inspired you. Is there something that's got you excited?
Well, there are many books that have influenced me and that excite me. But rather than mentioning a new book, I want to mention a book that many people who listen to this podcast may not know. which is a book from Ricardo Semler. Have you ever heard of Ricardo Semler?
No?
Great. So then I will call this book out. And the book is called Maverick. And I think it's probably like, it was published, I think in the 90s. And I read it a long time ago when I was in training to become a specialist in internal medicine. And it's really a book about an entrepreneur in Brazil who, during a very difficult economic time, really transformed his company into an extremely successful company. And I would now probably, based on many things I read since then, describe the key leadership and management principle as the right balance between freedom and accountability.
Yeah.
Don't treat the people who work for you like children, right? And give them you try to bring in very smart people, especially in these high-tech organizations that I lead. And you need to make sure that they can work in a way that works for them without trying to control them. But at the same time, that's the freedom part. At the same time, that's the accountability, right? We will measure whether people perform against their goals. We will continuously talk to them. We will make sure that they can be sufficiently in the office to create collective intelligence. At the same time, I don't want to be prescriptive.
Yeah.
And I know there are different views on this. So, of course, we know that many people started to work in a more hybrid way since the COVID-19 pandemic. I've always worked like that, actually. Even in academia, I did in early days a sabbatical at the University of California, San Diego, UCSD. I just finished my PhD, actually, so it was an early sabbatical. But I had a permanent position at the time as an associate professor of internal medicine at the Leiden University Medical Center in the Netherlands. So I was on the other side of the world, more or less. And even then, by email, we would work extremely successfully because I still had my research group in Leiden. And they would write on the manuscript and they would go to bed and I would revise it while they slept. And when they woke up, they would have to revision, to just give you an example. And I found out that actually can be very efficient. At GSK, I learned, leading a global organization, that by definition, you always work remotely, because when I was in the UK, I was not in the US, and the other way around, etc. So this will work very well if you get the principles right about freedom and accountability. So Ricardo Semler's Maverick is really something I would recommend for people who are open-minded about how to lead in a non-controlling way, but at the same time, of course, you want to set them up for success. Stay as close as possible to their strength and ways of working.
Interesting. How about you? How about you as a CEO? How do you kind of unwind or spark creativity outside of Candel?
Well, there are many things I enjoy, actually. First, I consider my job extremely creative, actually. So I'm an out-of-the-box thinker, I guess, while also trying to have a laser focus on delivering on our milestones, a catalyst, and we never drop the ball, I think, since I joined that company. But I always ask the question, could you think about this in a whole different way? Then I have a family, right? A wife and 4 children, adult children. I like spending time with them. I travel quite a bit because we all live in different countries, which is the consequence of an international career. At some point, children study somewhere, they get a partner, etc. So I get a lot of energy from them. I love music. I love dance. I love culture. I love making remote trips. Also with my children, actually, at least once a year. We go to sort of adventure trips. Right, last year in Patagonia, walking on glaciers, etc. So there are many things that inspire me, definitely art and being physical in the outdoors and enjoying a good time with family and friends.
Excellent. Maybe the last question, what would be something that you could tell us that, might surprise people?
What might surprise people is that at some point I was working in Eden, where I have an apartment next to my company. My wife was still in the UK, having her job over there. Kids were elsewhere. So I was just working day and night. I thought I need something else to stay mentally sane, more or less. And you know what I did? I started taking competitive dancing lessons in Latin. I can tell you, it's not so easy, but I made very good progress. And it's an amazing form of psychotherapy where you need to remember quite a lot, whole sequences of different dances, actually. But also where you're very close to the music and do completely different things. It stimulates other parts of your brain. So I don't think many people know this about me.
I didn't. So that's probably excellent. Well, Peter, an hour with you always goes by so fast. So thank you so much for giving us that time.
It was so nice to see you, Mike. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
That's it for this week's episode of Idea Collider. To continue the conversation, visit our website at ideapharma.com. Follow us in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast. Until next time, I'm Mike Rea, wishing you great success.